Hey, how's it going, everybody? Jeremy Donson here with E7 Music School, and today we're going to be going over All Summer Long by Kid Rock. Very excited to show this to you guys. Super fun. And we're going to start right at the beginning and break this down for you in detail. And just so you all know, anything that I put on YouTube is going to have a full song corresponding video with it available on my website at www.e7musicschool.com. So feel free to check that out. And as always, live lessons are available for all instruments, not just drums. All right, here we go. Let's get started from the top. As you can hear in the song, it's not the normal snare that he's hitting for this fill where he's going, right? So it's if you don't have a specific instrument that sounds like that, I mean, you could use several different instruments to make that sound. You can just do whatever you have, work with it, right? So I personally like to just do the snare and a high tom, because it's not a flam, it's just one hit. But you can either do high and snare together, or you can just do like that if you prefer. So either one of those is totally fine. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I do the snare and high tom together, and then I do bass by itself. So tom, bass, like so. And then I do and bass, right? Tom, bass, and bass. And when I say and, that's just hi-hat by itself. So tom, bass, and bass, like so. Tom, bass, and bass. Tom, bass, and bass. Just like that. So you do it 3 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 4th hit, you're going to crash with the snare drum instead. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Just like so. All right. So now we got that down. Let's just talk about real quick the spacing between the first crash and snare crash. The first crash and second crash. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So it's a full note there. 1E into 2E into 3E into 4, 1. If you like to count, it's a full quarter note beat there. All right, so that first crash is with snare. Second crash is with bass, just like that. Let me do it one more time. Snare, bass, or we'll say tom. So tom, bass, and bass. Tom, bass, and bass. Tom, bass, and bass. And then you just crash with the snare, and then crash with the bass. Okay, and if you're not used to bass independence here with those basses hitting in between the whole time, then just let me know and I'll help you with some techniques for that. But you really want to get a good timing there. So it's like everything's moving opposite. Your bass foot is moving opposite of the hits here. So when you come down, you're going up with your foot like that, right? Okay, so once we get to that point, 1. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do bass and snare and we're gonna do it 1, 2, 3, 3 times to the snare. So 1, 2, 3, bass, snare, bass, bass. Now once you do it the 3rd time, so 1 and snare and 2 and snare and 3 and snare. After that snare, you're going to do 2 hi-hats. So just think of it like bass and snare 1, 2 is the easiest way to do that. And of course, if you count, then you can certainly count how it's actually counted. But a lot of people, it's just easier to know how many hi-hats do I do before I do the next thing. So you're going to do 2. So bass and snare, 1, 2, bass, snare. is the beat here. Bass and snare, 1, 2, bass, snare, and then after that it's bass, bass, both with the hi-hat. So we got 1, 2, 3, snare, 1, 2, bass, snare, bass, bass. And lastly, you're going to do a drag on the first of those last two basses there. So it's going to go bass, snare, drag with the bass drum. So bass, snare, drag, like so. So bass, snare, drag, bass. Bass, snare, bass, bass. Bass, snare, bass, bass, like so. Now, if you're not used to doing drags here, I suggest maybe leaving it out at first. Just get used to this. And then once you're comfortable with that, then you can add the drag back in. But when you do this drag, it's your feet are going opposite again here too. So it's bass, snare, and then when your snare hits, you're going to go up with your foot, your prep stroke here, so that it's ready to kick, like so. And then you come down. So when you're getting ready to do that drag, if you have trouble with that, bass, snare, my foot is now ready to hit, and then I'm going to drag with my right foot coming down, my left foot coming up at the same time, and then closing together. So they're going to go opposite, and then they're going to close together. Just like that. Bass, snare, drag, bass. Bass, snare, drag, bass. All right, so now we got that far. So let's just put it together real quick. Ready, go. 1. So let's break this part down. So here you're going to go high bass, right? High tom, bass. Now after that, it gets a little tricky with this hi-hat here. So you want to go high bass and, like so, high bass and. Now where you're going to want to naturally put the next hi-hat is going to be on the snare, like that. High bass and bass snare with hi-hat, but it doesn't go there. It goes after the snare drum. So this stumbles quite a few people when they go to try to do this. So what you're going to do, breaking it down, is tom, bass, and bass, like so. Tom, bass, and bass. Both basses are by themselves. Tom, bass, and bass. Then you're going to do snare by itself. Then you're going to do hi-hat by itself. So tom, bass, and bass, snare, high. So just like that. Let's slow it down. Tom, bass, and bass, snare, high. Tom, bass, and bass, snare, high. Tom, bass, and bass, snare, high. Now, after you get that down, you're going to do two basses by themselves. Okay? Then you're going to do and bass, bass again. So, and bass, bass, and bass, bass, right? Then you do the crash, crash, right? Really cool fill, man. But those hi-hats make it a bit challenging. If it wasn't for the hi-hat placement here, it would be quite a bit easier, in my opinion. But that makes it a bit challenging. So if you wanted to, you could even just go, for now, just take it out until you're comfortable, and then when you are, you can work on putting these back in there. So one more time. Ready, go. And there you have it. Now, that gets us through to that fill. Now, after that, you go into a slightly different beat, which I'm going to show you right now. And then just future reference, the next fill you're going to do is the same fill, one change. Instead of hitting the snare like this, right? You're going to do the bass instead of the snare. So it's going to feel more natural actually doing that. But that's the only difference. You just replace the snare with the bass. So instead of going tom, bass, and bass, snare, high, you go tom, bass, and bass, bass, high, it just feels more natural, right? Muscle memory is a weird thing sometimes. You wouldn't think it would really matter if it's snare or bass, which one feels more natural, but that definitely does feel more natural. All right, so now let's get into this next beat that we're going to. Okay, so here we go. We're going to go over the verse now. So once you finish the fill, starting on that crash with the bass drum that we ended the fill on, we're going to start right there. So this is what we're going to play. Check it out. Now this beat is used often in the song. It's not the entire song, but it's a majority of the song on the beat, on the verse section. You're going to do this, right? So let's make sure we really have a good understanding of this beat, because you're going to use it a lot moving forward in the song. Okay, so this, breaking it down, you're going to go crash and snare, just like normal, right? Crash and snare, and then you're going to do 2 hi-hats. So we could count it 1 and 2 and 3, but the vast majority of what I've seen for students learning in all of my private students, weekly students, people online, feedback I've gotten from many of my subscribers and viewers is it's a lot easier for most people just to know, okay, what do I do, whether it's on and or 2 or 5 or whatever, you know what I mean? It's easier for me to know what to do, where it is, instead of necessarily the number all the time. So if you do like counting it, I could certainly help, work on counting it with you as well. But here's what you're going to do. You're going to go crash and snare 1 2. You're going to do 2 hi-hats here. Crash and snare 1 2. Crash and snare 1 2. Now once you do that, you're going to go bass, snare, and next. So crash and snare 1 2, bass, snare, and just like that. Now after that, it changes a little bit. So crash and snare 1 2, bass, snare, and bass and snare, and. Now the next part is going to go bass and snare, and then bass, bass, snare, bass, bass, and you're going to do the drag in the same place that you did last time. Bass, bass, right there. Bass, bass. So drag on that first bass of the last 2 basses. So it's going to go like this. Crash and snare 1 2, bass, snare, and bass and snare, and bass, bass, snare, bass, bass. Right? Let's do it again. Ready? Go. One more time. Ready? Go. Okay, now that's the first half. The next half is very similar, but you're going to take 1 bass out. So instead of going bass, bass, snare, drag, bass, you're going to go and bass, snare, drag, bass. That's very similar to what we just did. So let me put both of them together so you can see what it sounds like. Right, so we're going to go bass and snare 1 2, bass, snare, drag, bass, instead of bass and snare and bass, bass, snare, drag, bass. You're just taking that 1 bass drum out and replacing it with just a hi-hat. That's it. So it's the first one again, just to recap, is bass and snare and bass, bass, snare, drag, bass. So bass and snare and bass, bass, snare, drag, bass. The second one is bass and snare 1 2, bass, snare, drag, bass. Bass and snare 1 2, bass, snare, drag, bass. All right, so let's see what this sounds like. Here we go.
It was 1989, my thoughts were short, my hair was long, caught somewhere between a boy and man. She was 17 and she was far from in between. It was summertime in northern Michigan.
Right, and that's what I was talking about earlier on that fill, where instead of doing this, you just replace the snare with the bass. So that's what we were doing. Now we're doing, that's the only difference. So that's high bass and bass, bass and bass, bass, right? And there you have it. All right, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you guys. And if you like this video, please do be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And feel free to leave your comments below what you thought and things that you could use some help with. You can also email me at jeremy@e7musicschool.com or info@e7musicschool.com. Either way, I would love to hear from you guys. Thanks so much. Have fun, stay awesome, and rock on. Talk to you soon.